The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up on my bathroom floor with my cheek pressed against cold tile, and a sound in my ears like something slowly tearing loose. I didn't know how long I'd been there. I counted the grout lines near my nose, 6, 7, 8, and thought that was a strange thing to notice when your head felt like someone had driven a spike through it sideways. When I finally touched the spot behind my left ear, my fingers came back sticky and dark. I lay there another minute, already building the excuse. Too much wine. Got up in the night and lost my footing. The blood was just a scratch. The lie came easy. I'd had years of practice fitting them precisely over whatever my brother had just done. Last night, it had been the family photo. We do one every Thanksgiving, all of us lined up in front of the fireplace in my parents' house in San Antonio. My mother arranges us the same way every year. My brother in the center because he's taller, because he photographs better, because the sun in our family has always been my brother, and the rest of us are just planets doing quiet orbits. I was standing to his left when it happened. Someone said smile, and the flash went off, and I felt both of his hands, flat-palmed, deliberate, between my shoulder blades. And then the world lurched sideways, and the corner of the mantel met the back of my skull with a sound I won't forget as long as I live. I went down hard. Someone laughed. It took me a full second to understand the laughter was aimed at me. "God, Tilda, you are so clumsy," my mother said, already bending to help me up. "Did you have too much wine before dinner?" My brother crouched next to me, concerned face in place, hand on my shoulder. "You okay, sis?" I looked at his eyes. They were perfectly calm. I'd grown up in a family where my brother's moods were weather, and everyone else just lived inside them. He was 3 years older than me, the first son, the one who got the bigger bedroom and the patient explanations and the unlimited second chances. When I was 9, he pushed me out of the tree fort and told my parents I'd slipped. When I was 14, he tripped me going down the basement stairs and then carried my ice pack up and sat with me for an hour, so warm and helpful that I actually felt grateful to him. Every time something happened, my mother's response was some version of, "He doesn't know his own strength, or you're so sensitive. Tilda, or your brother loves you more than you know. Stop turning everything into a drama." I learned very early to doubt myself. Looking back, I think that was the whole point. 3 years ago, I'd been helping my brother move equipment into his new garage. He'd called and asked so warmly, cleared his Saturday, was so genuinely brotherly about it, that I'd driven up without a second thought. I was coming down a stepladder with a box of tools when it shifted underneath me. I went off the side and hit the concrete floor face first. My eye swelled shut within an hour. My brother had been standing directly behind the ladder. He'd been the one to talk me out of the ER. "It's just a bruise, Tilda. You're not even that swollen. You'll spend 3 hours in a waiting room for them to tell you to put ice on it." He brought me a bag of frozen peas and was so attentive, so present, that I'd believed him the way you believe someone who is standing right there being kind. I drove home that evening with a face that ached all the way to my back teeth and told myself I was lucky to have such a thoughtful brother. 14 months ago, our grandmother died. She left me the lake house. It's a small cedar and stone place on the edge of Canyon Lake, about 40 minutes north of San Antonio. Our grandmother had lived there since she retired, kept a garden, watched the water turn different colors through the seasons, hosted me for weekends when things at home felt too loud. We were close in the way that sometimes skips a generation, the kind of closeness that doesn't need explaining. When the family attorney read the will, my brother went very still. His expression didn't change. His jaw didn't move. His eyes didn't move. And then he smiled, slowly, which was somehow worse than if he'd stood up and shouted. That night I overheard him in the driveway on his phone. I didn't catch much. Just, "She doesn't know what to do with property and it should have gone to someone who," and then he saw me in the doorway and stopped mid-sentence. We never talked about it directly, but something shifted after that. A rug I'd walked over 100 times seemed to catch my foot. A garage shelf came loose while I was reaching for something. Small, explainable, The kind of thing you chalk up to bad luck when you're determined not to see a pattern. I drove myself to the ER the morning after Thanksgiving because calling anyone felt impossible. I could already hear my mother's voice. "You don't need a doctor. You've always bruised easily. This is not the emergency you're making it into." And I'd heard that voice so many times over so many years that it had colonized part of my brain and spoke up every time I tried to take care of myself in a way she wouldn't approve of. The drive to Austin Regional took 22 minutes. I kept my eyes on the lane markers and told myself I just needed some ibuprofen in a dark room. The triage nurse looked at me flinch under the intake lights and had me in an exam room inside of 10 minutes. Dr. Pelham introduced herself quietly, pulled a stool to my eye level rather than standing over me. She asked me to follow her finger, squeeze both her hands, track her pen. She had the unhurried manner of someone who has learned that rushing a frightened patient gets you less information, not more. When she asked how I'd hurt my head, I said, "My brother pushed me into a fireplace at a family dinner." The words came out of my mouth and landed in the clean, white room like something that had been waiting a long time to be said out loud. "Has anything like this happened before?" she asked, pen still. "There have been a lot of accidents," I said. She looked at me without writing anything down for a moment. Then, "Let's get some scans." I lay in the imaging machine and stared at the ceiling and thought about his hands. Both palms. The flat deliberateness of them. Not the stumbling contact of someone who'd been startled by the camera flash, not the careless roughness of a sibling who doesn't know their own strength. He had placed his hands and applied pressure with intent. I had felt the decision in it. I'd felt it clearly, even as I was falling, and I had still spent the next several hours trying to explain it away over turkey and green beans, because the alternative, the real explanation, was a thing I didn't know how to survive yet. Dr. Pelham came back differently than she'd left. She'd been calm before. Now she was careful, which isn't the same thing. She pulled the stool close again and turned the monitor so I could see. "Tilda." Her voice was low and level. "You have a concussion, which we expected. But I want to show you something else." She clicked to a second image and pointed. "This area shows evidence of an older fracture, this region near the orbital socket. Based on the bone density and the healing pattern, I'd put this at roughly 2 to 4 years ago. Do you recall injuring your face around that time?" 3 years ago. The stepladder, the concrete floor, my brother standing behind it. "Yes," I said, "I fell off a ladder." She didn't push back on the word fell. She just said, "Given the pattern of injury and what you've described about how it happened, I'm required to make a report. This is a mandatory reporting situation." She stood and picked up the phone mounted on the wall and the story I'd been telling myself about my life, about accidents and clumsiness and being too sensitive, began, very quietly, to come apart at every seam. Detective Harrow arrived within the hour. She was younger than I'd have expected, mid-30s, with the particular stillness of someone trained to move slowly in rooms where people are scared. She pulled a chair to my level and opened a small notebook without ceremony. She asked who had been at the dinner, where my brother was standing when I fell, whether I'd lost consciousness, whether there had been other incidents. Each question landed somewhere precise, like she already knew the shape of what she was building. Then, "Has your brother ever discouraged you from seeing a doctor after you were hurt?" The frozen peas. "You don't need the ER, Tilda. The sprained wrist in high school that turned out to be broken. The cut on my forehead he'd cleaned up himself, very efficiently, very helpfully, and told me stitches would be overkill. He had been so present, so caring in those moments, so useful." I understood now, sitting in that exam room, that usefulness had been the whole mechanism. "Every time," I said, "every single time something happened, he was the one to tell me I didn't need medical help." Did you believe him? I wanted to believe him. I could feel the distance between those two things with a clarity I hadn't had before. I don't think I actually did. I think I just couldn't afford to believe anything else. Detective Harrow wrote that down, then the door opened without a knock. My mother came in ahead of the air itself, voice already in motion, my father quiet and pale behind her. She had the expression she wears when she's decided something is an emergency she's been appointed to manage. Tilda. She stopped when she registered Detective Harrow, recalibrated. What exactly are you telling these people? This is a private family situation. Your brother was playing around. You know how the holidays get. Everyone's had wine. People get rowdy. Mrs. Detective Harrow rose. He did not push you on purpose. You know that. You've always been sensitive to things. You read into moments. You have since you were little. Mom, it came out quieter than I expected. Stop. She blinked. I have a concussion, I said, and a fracture that healed wrong 3 years ago when I fell off a ladder with my brother standing directly behind it. I'm not confused. I'm not reading into anything, and I'm not going to tell the detective I imagined it. Something moved across my mother's face. Fury first, then underneath it, something that looked like the first crack in a wall she'd been mortaring for decades. I need you both to step outside, Detective Harrow said, in the tone that does not wait to be argued with. When the door closed, the room seemed to expand. Detective Harrow sat back down. You did well, she said simply. Then the door opened again. Softly this time, tentatively, someone who'd checked whether they were allowed to enter. My Aunt Maud, my mother's younger sister, stood in the frame with her coat still buttoned, like she'd come straight from the parking lot without stopping to think too hard about it, in case she lost her nerve. Detective, she said, her voice was barely holding together, I have something I need to tell you. Maud is the family member no one quite counts. Softer than my mother, more accommodating, the kind of person who absorbs the sharp edges of every gathering so other people don't have to feel them. She sat down across from me and her hands were shaking on the table. I was in the hallway last night, she said, by the coat closet. Everyone else was turned toward the camera. She stopped. Breathed once. He looked over his shoulder. He checked where everyone was looking, and then he put both hands flat on her back and shoved, hard, forward and down. She stopped again. It was not an accident. The room went very still. I didn't say anything last night. I didn't know how to. Your mother has always made it very clear what happens to people in this family who cause trouble. But I've been sitting in my car in this parking lot for 45 minutes and I can't drive away. She looked at me. And 3 years ago, at his house, I got there early to help with the move. I came around the side of the garage and I saw his hand on one of the ladder legs, and when he heard my car on the gravel, he let go and walked to the other side of the garage. By the time I came in, he was unpacking boxes. Her voice broke. I told myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. I am so sorry, Tilda. I am so sorry it took me this long. I reached across and put my hand over hers. Neither of us said anything else for a while. Detective Harrow called me at home on Wednesday morning. We pulled footage from your parents' front door camera, she said. The angle captures the living room window. It's very clear, Tilda. He checked behind him twice before making contact. And in the 2 seconds after you went down, before anyone else reacted, there's a frame where he's turned away from the room. She paused. He's smiling. I sat down on my kitchen floor without consciously deciding to. We also executed a search warrant on his phone this morning. There are dated notes going back 13 months. Property assessment records for Canyon Lake. Your visit schedule to the lake house, dates you'd driven up alone. Seasonal weather data for that stretch of road. Notations about which neighboring properties are vacant in winter. Another pause, shorter. There's a folder. It's labeled when she's there alone. The lake house. The cedar chairs on the porch. The way the water looked at dawn when no one else was awake, and it was just me and my grandmother's garden, and the particular quiet of a place that had always felt safe. I had driven up alone 3 times since she died, to clear her things, to keep the garden from going feral, to sit and breathe and feel close to her, and every single time, my brother had known exactly where I was. The notes referenced the inheritance. Detective Harrow continued. He'd contacted Grandma's attorney twice in the months before her death asking about co-ownership arrangements. He was told the will was airtight. After that, she let the implication settle. We're moving forward with charges: assault causing bodily harm and documented intent to cause further harm. I'd like to coordinate timing with you. My brother was arrested on a Sunday evening. Detective Harrow had suggested my parents' house, where he'd already be for dinner. I understood her reasoning without her having to explain it. Some lies need to come apart in the same room where they were built, with the same people watching. I drove myself. I sat in the car for 4 minutes before going inside. He was at the kitchen island with a beer, in the middle of a story about something at work, easy and unhurried. He looked up when I came in and gave me the smile, the one he'd been using on me since childhood, the one that said, "Aren't you lucky I still like you?" My mother was at the stove. My father was in his chair by the window. Detective Harrow knocked 2 minutes later. She came in with 2 officers, and my brother set his beer down on the counter very precisely, carefully, like a man buying himself 3 extra seconds. "Corbin Aldgate." Her voice was clear and steady. "You're under arrest for assault causing bodily harm. You have the right to remain silent." He laughed. Short, surprised, practiced. The laugh of someone who has spent a lifetime talking his way around consequences and hadn't seriously considered this moment. Over a shove at a holiday dinner? You cannot be serious. And for documented evidence of intent to cause further harm to the same victim. Anything you say can and will be used. "Mom," he turned to her, Tell them this is what Tilda does. Tell them how she is." My mother didn't move. "Tell them she imagines things. Tell them you were there. You saw the whole thing." "Corbin." Her voice had gone somewhere very thin. The performance dropped then, just for a second, and what I saw underneath it was the thing I'd been taught my whole life not to name, raw and trapped and absolutely certain of its own righteousness. "She does not deserve that property," he said. Each word landed flat and deliberate, like he'd been waiting a long time to say them in a room with other people. Grandma was not competent when she signed those papers. Half the time in her last year, she couldn't remember the month. A woman in that state does not get to hand a lakefront property to someone who goes up there 3 times a year and lets the tomatoes die. That house should have been split. It should have come to me. He looked at me then, and his voice shifted into something almost reasonable, almost sad. "I've been managing this family's practical concerns my entire life while you've been off in Austin playing at being an adult, and you walk away with a lake house because you were her little favorite. It's not right. It was never right." My father, from his chair by the window, said very quietly, "Son, stop talking now." As the officers moved to cuff him, my brother turned and looked at me one last time. Not only with rage, with something that looked disturbingly like he believed what he was saying. As though the 30 years of careful cruelties were something I had done to him, and this was simply the accounting. "You couldn't let it go," he said. "You never could." I looked back at him. I didn't look away. "No," I said, "I couldn't." My mother sat at the kitchen table after they walked him out. She sat the way you sit when the thing you've been propping up for decades no longer has anything left to rest against. My father moved from his chair and sat beside her and put his hand over hers without saying anything. I drove home in the dark and didn't cry until I was parked in my own driveway with the engine off, and then I cried for a long time and let myself. The weeks after unfolded the way aftermath always does. In paperwork and court dates and phone calls and stretches of quiet, where you try to figure out who you are now that the thing you've been surviving has recently stopped. The footage, the phone evidence, and Maud's testimony together left very little room to negotiate. My brother was sentenced to 16 months, no early release consideration for the first 10. A protective order was in place before I left the courthouse. The attorney told me it was one of the cleaner cases she'd worked, meaning, by then, the evidence was overwhelming enough that he'd stopped trying. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening about a month later. She didn't apologize directly. I don't think she had the language yet. Not really. What she said was, "I've started seeing someone, a counselor. I think I've been letting myself not understand things for a long time." She stopped there. I said, "I know, Mom." "I know you did." And then we were both quiet on the line for a while, which wasn't forgiveness yet, but was at least the beginning of honesty, which I think is where forgiveness has to start. The lake house is mine. I drove up last month on a cold Saturday morning in November, almost exactly a year since we lost her. I brought coffee in a thermos and pruning shears, and a pair of leather work gloves. The garden had grown wild in patches and gone bare in others, but the structure of it was still there, the way she'd planned it, the bones underneath waiting. The cedar chairs on the porch were dusty and solid. The road in had been empty. I sat with my coffee and watched the water. It was silver gray at that hour, very still, the same color it's always been. I thought about my grandmother, who had seen something in me worth preserving, and about my mother, who is trying, and about my brother, who is somewhere beginning to reckon with what he built in the dark and called normal. And I thought about that morning on the bathroom floor, my cheek against the tile, blood in my hair, the old familiar lie already forming, and how some part of me had finally been too tired to finish telling it. That part drove me to the ER. That part sat across from Detective Harrow and said, "Every time." That part stood in front of my mother and said, "I am not confused. It had been there all along." That part of me, quiet and keeping score underneath everything I'd been trained to doubt. I think about people who are still in that bathroom, still counting the grout lines, still reaching for the excuse before they've even fully registered the pain. I was there for 30 years, and I know exactly how reasonable it sounds to stay. It sounds like keeping the peace. It sounds like being a good sister. It sounds like not making a scene. But your body knows. Your body has been keeping an honest record this whole time, even when you couldn't afford to read it. The moment you find someone who will read it with you, a doctor, a detective, a shaking aunt in a parking lot who finally couldn't drive away, everything that was buried starts to surface. Trust that. Trust it before I did. Leave a comment if any part of this resonates, and if you've never heard someone say out loud that what happened to you was real. I'm saying it now. It was real. You didn't imagine it, and you don't have to keep explaining it away.